Partial funding for the following program has been provided by the Friends of Iowa Public Television. Iowa Public Television presents Paul Creston Meets the Mirecourt Trio, a retrospective. Here's your host, Peter Hamlin.
Good evening. In a moment, we'll be watching a program called Paul Creston Meets the Mirecourt Trio. The program focuses on the distinguished American composer Paul Creston, who died in August of 1985. Joining us tonight to discuss Creston's life and work is cellist Terry King of the Mirecourt Trio. Mr. King was closely associated with Paul Creston during the composer's last years, and several Creston pieces were composed with this cellist in mind. Terry, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
I'm curious what you learned working as closely as you did with a composer like Paul Creston.
Well, you learn a lot of things, but I think the most important thing you learn as a musician is the confirmation of your instincts. That you find that working with the creator of music, that when they share their creation with you and you in turn recreate that, your instincts are brought into the creative process, and in many times they affect the final product. And I must say they did to a certain extent with Paul.
What was he like specifically to work with? Was he easy to get along with? Was he demanding?
Oh, very easy to get along with. We immediately became friends. I mean, I would write these letters, "Dear Mr. Creston," and all that. And the first letter back, "Don't you dare call me Mr. Creston," you know. It was very congenial and collegiate from the very beginning. He would send fragments of his trio that he wrote for us, and he would ask, "Is this possible to do on the cello?" and things like that. So we had quite a nice relationship.
Well, one of the interesting things that comes out in the program we're about to see is that a composer and a performer are not as separate as we sometimes think.
Yeah,
I wouldn't call it a collaboration, and yet he responds to what you do and you respond to what he does, and the interaction is interesting. And I don't think a lot of people are aware of it just from seeing trios perform in a concert hall.
Yeah. He's a composer, I think, like many composers who, when they write it down, that is the piece, that is the way it should be. But even the first time through the piece, we saw it in a genuinely different way, not in a conflicting way, but a different way than he had thought of it in some places in the piece. And we played it, and he says, "You know, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's beautiful the way you do that." You know, so it remains a interpretive portion of the piece that is slightly different from what he's written. He did not notate that. There's no reason to notate that, because that was just the way we saw the values that he wrote.
Well, some of the qualities you're talking about, I wonder if you were to meet Paul Creston, not a performer, not you personally, but somebody were to meet him in a bus station or somewhere like that, what kind of a person would they encounter? What was he like?
You might just pass him right by. He's a normal-looking gentleman, very robust for a man in his 70s. My goodness, he was very robust.
Full of energy.
Full of energy. You would never... he was the sort of person you expect to live to be 100, you know.
Is there anything you could say about, I don't know, when you're playing a Paul Creston piece, do you play a passage and say, "That's the Paul Creston I know"? Is there anything in his personality or even his life that is reflected in the music?
There's two sides. There's the expansive personality, the first movement of the cello suite. It's so powerful, and he was always drawn to gigantic gestures. And then on the other side of the coin is the tremendously introspective and intimate side, the arias, the cantilenas of his music, which he would say were his favorites in a piece. You had the powerful edges, you know, the outer movements were very demonstrative, and then in the middle there was something quixotic, and then the focal point in his pieces were usually the singing movements.
I would like very much to hear what your view is on where Paul Creston fits in to the scheme of American music. That's a hard question in a short time, but where does he fit in?
Well, he is a very interesting soul. Being entirely self-taught, he viewed music in a way that is somewhat reminiscent of the 18th century composers, but he did this in what I mean to say is, composers used to be, they used to live in another composer's home, and they became a total apprentice to this composer, and that's how they really learned. They didn't go and take a class and that was it. They actually lived day in and day out with the composer. And Creston, his idols were dead. Bach, Debussy, and, well, Ravel was alive. But those were his three main idols. And it's that school, Fauré, the late Fauré works too. Those composers are the ones that influenced him the most. So therefore, he's not what we would call a nationalistic composer. He's a cosmopolitan composer, not someone you would say, you hear a few phrases and say, that's typically American. No, you don't hear that in his music. His music is of the world, of the European tradition.
Did you, could you give us an idea of how he fits in to history? If you were writing a music history book, what would you say about Paul Creston? What were his contributions, do you think?
Another hard one. I think he's a wonderful link between the late 19th century and the ideas that were sprouting up all over the place, and the certain continuity between the composers like Brahms and Fauré, and the continuation of those European traditions turned around into a unique voice, all his own. There is no Creston school. No one really followed Creston. He made his own path, and as I say, his examples were the French and Bach. So it was very contrapuntal on one hand and very suave and chalant on the other.
And lush. And
lush,
yes. Yeah. You talk in the program about the importance of this trio just as you were commissioning it, just as you were getting ready to perform it for the first time. Now 5 years have passed. How do you view the trio now? Have your views of it changed any? Has it been performed by other groups? Kind of curious, I guess, about the history since the program of that trio.
I'm sure the trio has been performed by other groups. Its position, I would say, is just as important or more important than we thought it was. We're witnessing not a return, but a direction towards conservatism in music, which is not to say that we've forsaken all the experiments that have happened up to this point, but people are really looking for a spiritual response in the music they listen to. And the first time around, people would like to take a hold of something so that they want to hear it again, and that next time will yield maybe a deeper feeling for the music. And it's that reason we commissioned Creston in the first place, knowing his work, knowing that the music that he writes is moving on the first listening, and we are in the profession of making music for an audience who wants to hire the trio, wants the trio to come back again. And we've paid our dues as far as the school is concerned. We don't do that anymore. We used to do that.
How do you spell that?
Well, so we were looking for works that would speak to an audience immediately. And the 5 years since the piece, it has its own position in trio literature. There is nothing like it, absolutely nothing like it. And he was so fond of writing pieces in the suite style. That is, a movement, a prelude, a scherzo, a tarantella, a cantilena, an aria. And he was very fond of just having performers play one movement out of it. And so on the road, when we play in Kansas and Nebraska and places where they don't hear a lot of trios, we'll play one or two movements of Creston's trio, and it really gets a great response.
Is there
also in New York, too, I might add. New York, they love the piece, but the critics weren't too crazy about it because they heard a familiar kind of a language. They never heard his language per se, but they hear a familiarity in the language, so they think, oh, it's not new.
Terry, it's been very interesting talking with you about a composer whom you knew personally and whose music you have performed.
We'd go on all night, couldn't we?
We could, indeed. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Cellist Terry King of the Mirecourt Trio. And now we'd like to invite you to stay tuned for Paul Creston Meets the Mirecourt Trio.
In an increasingly illustrious career, the Mirecourt Trio are just reaching their highest pinnacle. For over the past 4 days, they have had an addition to the group, a very large addition. For collectively, they are working with their idol, this man, Paul Creston, one of the top American composers of the 20th century. Paul Creston is the composer of over 100 major works, including 5 symphonies, 15 concertos, and 10 symphonic band works. His countless awards include 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, the Music Critics Circle Award, and the American Academy of Arts and Letters Music Award. His life's work represents a magnificent legacy to future generations. His trip from San Diego to Grinnell is a thrill indeed for the trio. It is also a thrill for the 74-year-old Creston, because he will be the featured guest at a concert composed entirely of Paul Creston music. A concert which will debut Creston's Opus 112, an original piano trio composed specifically for the 3 members of the Mirecourt Trio and commissioned by Grinnell College. Tonight, you'll have the rare opportunity to meet the artists and the composer and to witness their affectionate collaboration.
Hi, welcome, welcome. God, it's
It
so
must have been a long
funny to see
trip
someone
for
with a
you.
suntan.
Yeah?
It's so funny to see someone with a suntan.
Well, I came from the sunny land.
Yeah.
Oh,
you-
really?
San Diego.
Yeah.
How long has it been since you've been in the Midwest?
Oh, 20 years ago.
20.
Well, hasn't changed a bit.
Not much different.
I haven't seen it yet.
Paul Creston is one of the most performed of all American composers, and always will be because of the immediacy of his music. But yet, there are many segments of society that don't even know they've heard Creston, although they've heard it much of their lives. For example, the old Cronkite, Walter Cronkite series. What was the name of that series? 20th Century. He wrote 14 of those scores for 14 of those programs. Millions of people saw that series on television, but I bet not one of them knew that Paul Creston had written 14 of those episodes. Or Theater for Helen Hayes, live on television, and Tallulah Bankhead, and Storyville, which is a children's hour, and the Hour of Faith. So millions of people have heard his music, and they don't know it.
But Creston followers do know that Paul Creston, born Don Giuseppe Gudovecchio, is of solid Italian stock.
Well, my parents came over from Prizzi, a small town in the province of Palermo, Sicily, in 1905, just a year before I was born. My brother was already born in Italy. He was 3 years older than I am. And I was born in New York City, October 10th, 1906. I went to public schools. When I was 6 years old, my mother, my brother, and myself were sent to Italy by my father to spend 6 months there in this little town of Prizzi. And I remember going to the circus there, and that my uncle played in the circus band. And to this day, I don't remember what happened at the circus. I can't remember any of the acts, but I can still hear his clarinet tones in my ear. It impressed me so much. I might say that I was prepared for that when I was 4 years old by my father, because he taught me Sicilian folk songs to the strumming of his guitar. That was my first introduction to music. When I was 8 years old, I had started piano lessons with a teacher who taught every instrument, piano, violin, guitar, anything you mentioned, but couldn't play any one of them. As a result, I was brought up on waltzes, all types of waltzes, Waldteufel waltzes, and on operatic transcriptions, Italian operas. I never heard the name or saw the name of Chopin, Mozart, Beethoven, no such composers. I became acquainted by a fellow by the name of J.S. Bach, because I always frequented the library, public library, and I saw about 20 volumes of music by this one Bach. I said, he must have been someone. So I took 3 at a time home, tried to go through them. I couldn't make head or tail out of them. I wasn't trained for it. Now, this day, he's my God in music.
And what Paul Creston didn't learn from Bach, he learned on his own. Completely self-taught in harmony, composition, and orchestration, the young Creston was aggressive, industrious, and somewhat unconventional. At age 15, he was a high school pullout, so he might concentrate everything on his music. At age 16, he and his future wife were promised, and at 20, he married Louise Gatto, a member of the original Martha Graham dance group and a budding choreographer. With her help, Creston penned his first composition, 5 choric dances for piano. Still, over the years, Creston had to work at a variety of jobs to help pay the bills, from a delivery boy to a theater organist, until finally, he got his big break. In 1938, at the age of 32, he received the prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship for Composition. Paul Creston was on his way. Paul Creston tells of his first encounter with conductor Arturo Toscanini.
Well, it was about 1943, and I received a letter from Toscanini at 11 o'clock at night, special delivery letter, 11 o'clock. We were already in bed. And it said this, I like both choric dances, 2 choric dances, but because of the limitation of radio time, would you mind if I do only the second one, if I play only the second one? I felt like calling him up and say, you can play 1 phrase, as long as you play something of it. But I called him up the next morning. I wrote to him. I said, by all means, do whatever you want to do. So Toscanini scheduled it with the NBC Symphony Orchestra on his American program. And he also did the Rhapsody in Blue of Gershwin, the Lincoln Legend of Morton Gould, the Western Suite by Eddie Siegmeister. Well, I went to the rehearsal of it, and Morton Gould had just had his piece rehearsed. And he said, Paul, you're in for the thrill of your life. I said, I know it. You don't have to tell me. So I sit down, and he starts, he's going, boom, ba ba ba, bum, 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 bum. She said, that's beautiful, beautiful. No, no, no. I said, what does he want, blood? It's perfect. He couldn't do any better than that. He tells them a few things and do this and this and that. It is more beautiful. Never thought of it. Then comes the next section. I just wrote down poco crescendo, getting a little louder, all right? So bum 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 ba da 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 bum 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 bum. No. Look, you make a crescendo, then you drop a little bit before this next phrase, make a bigger crescendo. You drop a little bit, then make a still bigger crescendo. I said, that's what I want. So at the end of the rehearsal, he called all the composers over to him. They said, look, because of the limitation of time, I will not ask you each to come up to the podium to acknowledge the applause. I will motion to you, and you stand up in place. So we said, okay, that's fine, maestro. So comes the time of the broadcast, and a lady sitting next to my wife is remarking to her friend who's with her. She said, Morton Gould, I know him, I know that name, but Paul Creston, who's he? My wife didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. We just kept on looking straight ahead. Came the time when Toscanini plays my piece, and the applause is so thunderous, he motions to me, come up to the podium. I go up there. So I get back to my seat, and this lady turns to my wife. She says, I'm Mabel Schirmer. Is that your husband? She said, yes. I said, well, why haven't we published him? And Louise said, my husband did submit his music to Schirmer's. They rejected it. That was 10 years ago. So she said, I'll see about that. That year, the 10th year after they published my Bird of the Wilderness, they put me in an exclusive contract for 5 years. And they published everything I wrote from that time on.
Creston's visit to Grinnell exemplifies the commission process, a procedure inherent in the music profession. For most composers are commissioned by fee to originate their compositions. For individuals, foundations, universities, or music organizations.
Use of funds. It would help to bring a new work of art into being. It would help the members of the Mirecourt Trio professionally, and they are, after all, members of our faculty, and we think the professional development is terribly important, that we are not simply teachers, but we're also scholars, and this is the form of scholarly contribution for a musician, and it seems that it's incumbent upon the institution to help musicians to be at the forefront of their own discipline.
Oh my God. Where do we go? Let's go this way. That's terrible. You've been softened up. I think your tan is out of place.
My who?
Your tan is out of place in Grinnell. Definitely. This is incredible. For April,
Perhaps one of the more unique aspects of the Grinnell Commission, aside from showcasing another typical Iowa spring, will be the intangibles, the fulfillment of a dream, the rare opportunity for these artists as individuals to share their professional knowledge and experiences and to savor the total experience.
Since Mr. Creston is Italian, we thought we'd honor him with some Italian soup. So what we have here are Italian tomatoes. A little tarragon, a little bit of garlic, a little bit of dill, and these are plum tomatoes from the Italian ranches in California, near where Paul lives. Paul gets those things in San Diego. We don't get them too often in Iowa. There's no way that you are going to like the tomato soup.
Joanne said she's going to walk because there's a car on back of her, but she's gone now. You can't do anything about it. How far does she have to walk?
Over to the school.
How far is that?
Well, where we drove from. 4 blocks. She won't have any trouble.
Where is the movie house? Across the street from the post office. Where's the post office?
Across the street from the movie house.
Creston's visit to Grinnell will also have some benefits for several of the college's students.
When I ask to write or even if I decide myself to write a composition, I think about it anywhere from 6 months to 5 years. If it's a major work, I mean. What happens when you're commissioned to write a work and you have, say, only 3 months to do it? You can't spend 6 months on thinking about it.
Like the Mirecourt Trio.
Eh?
Like the Mirecourt Trio. Right, so you're the commissioned trio.
You know what happens? I have a backlog, and sometimes it's written down, sometimes it's back in my head, backlog of ideas of what I'm going to do. I have many ideas backlogged that I haven't done yet. Now, my 23rd Psalm, which is only about 4.5 minutes long, you know how many years I thought about that before I wrote it? Take a guess. 13 years. Why? I wanted to be absolutely sure that I could depict or portray, whatever the word is you want to say, translate into musical terms what those beautiful words are saying. It took a long time. I wouldn't dare to do it unless I do it. I was sure that I would do it justice. To me, that's probably the greatest prayer that was ever written. Composing, to me, is a sort of prayer, a method of religion, a method of praying. As I need good food, proper food, for the nourishment of my body, and I need good books to read for the nourishment of my mind, so do I need good music, to compose good music for the nourishment of my soul.
when a composer writes something, it's on paper. We have to take that and transmit it to an audience and make it real. And it's just an enhancement of everything you see. And that's really what we've studied all of our lives, how to interpret and make real that music into an interpretive language that people can understand.
When we move an audience, there's a self-satisfaction there, that knowing that what we have felt has passed on to the listener. But when you have the feeling that what we are expressing is going to touch the audience and in turn touches the composer as well, I think that's the high art of music.
I think you fellas are a little too young to know a song that was very popular many years ago. What can I say after I say I'm sorry? In this case, what can I say after I say I was deeply moved?
Oh, thank you.
We are too, believe
It's
me.
such rewarding music to play. I mean,
It's one of the greatest things that's ever been.
from the heart.
Now, I hate to do this, but I have to philosophize a little bit.
That's fine.